For as long as I can remember, I've always been in the background. My name is Julia Bennett, and I grew up in Graceville, a tiny, time-frozen town in Oregon where everyone knows each other and change comes slowly, like the rains in October. Our house stood on a quiet street, with a vine-covered garden and a lopsided mailbox at the gate, which my father promised to fix from spring to winter. He never fixed it. As well as many other things. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching it. My younger sister Savannah was born when I was just 1 year and 3 months old. From the very beginning, she seemed to light up everything around her. Big blue eyes, ringing laughter, golden curls, like from an advertisement for baby shampoo. Even the nurse at the hospital said, looking at her, "Wow, a real doll." And then she added, with a polite stretch, looking at me, "You must be smart." That's how it started. She is the light, I am the shadow. In the early years, everything was not so obvious. We played together, built houses out of pillows, had tea parties for teddy bears, and nothing seemed to be able to separate us. But every year there was more and more difference in the way we were treated. They bought better toys for Savannah, gave her more attention, and even laughed at her whims. I was the eldest, which meant I had to give in by default. "You're an adult, Jules," set an example, Mom would say when Savannah took the book from me or finished my dessert. I remember one day especially clearly. I turned 10, and I was waiting for something special. Not a holiday, like the girls in the movies, not a mountain of gifts, just attention. We were sitting at the kitchen table, me, my parents, and Savannah. A modest chocolate cake was placed in front of me, out of a box, without candles. "Money's tight this month," Mom explained, not even looking at me. I nodded, not asking too much. But a couple of weeks later, I saw Savannah, all beaming, receiving a brand new tablet with a sequin cover. "She's doing so well at her dancing," Mom said. I didn't say anything. It seemed to me that any word would sound like envy, and to envy is a shame. Over dinner, Savannah would spend hours telling how she had danced the fute or how the new teacher had called her sunshine, and her parents would listen with their mouths hanging open. When I tried to mention how I defended my science project or got an A for my essay, my father said, "That's sweet, Jules," and he'd dive back into his phone. His finger lazily slid across the screen, while I tried to hold at least a tiny bit of their attention. Savannah was allergic. Her body couldn't stand even traces of peanuts, and one day, after a sandwich at a school picnic, she had a severe seizure. After that, Mom imposed a strict ban: no nuts at home, no traces, not even thoughts. I loved peanut butter sandwiches. It was my little consolation, especially on those days when I felt particularly unwanted. But now that too has been taken away from me. Moreover, I was not even allowed to take such sandwiches to the lunchbox, just in case. Mom said, "You don't want to put your sister at risk, do you?" I nodded. What else could I say? It was only at Grandma Martha's that I felt alive. Her house smelled of cinnamon, candied orange peels, and knitted coziness. There were no expectations, no glances gliding by. We baked cookies together, listened to old records and talked. Real conversations where my every word was heard. "They're making a mistake, honey," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "You deserve more than just being a shadow." "Why is it always about Savannah?" I asked one day, helping her spread the dough on a baking sheet. "I don't have allergies. I'm a good student. I try. Why is this not enough?" Grandma squeezed my hand. "Because sometimes adults are blind, Julia. They love in their own way, but it's not always right. And it's not your fault." I nodded, watching the cookies brown in the oven. I was only 11, but I felt tired already. Tired of fighting for a love that was supposed to be unconditional. When I once asked my mom to join the science club, she looked at me, frowned, and said, "Jules, it's too expensive." We don't have enough time and money as it is. A couple of days later, I bought Savannah new ballet shoes, just in case she enjoyed the classes. I wasn't even mad. I just stopped asking. "You're not like her," Grandma whispered as I sobbed softly in her lap. "You have a different flame, Julia. Not bright and noisy, like fireworks, but deep, warm, like a candle in the dark. And one day someone will notice him." But no one saw this flame at home. Mom considered me difficult. I asked a lot of questions, didn't like phone calls, didn't want to hang out. "Savannah is the soul of the company," she told a neighbor. "And Jules, well, she's always on her mind." While Savannah had dancing, painting, and vocal lessons, I sat alone in my room, drawing graphs and writing ideas in a notebook. I looked out the window, watching my classmates go to the park or laugh at the shops, and imagined that one day I would be able to escape from this house, from this role of a minor character in someone's life. I studied not because it was expected of me, but because knowledge was the only thing that didn't look down on me. The formulas were honest, the equations were not preferred, and the books were accepted without conditions. And despite everything, I didn't let myself go out. I just waited. Someday I'll prove that a candle can burn as well as a spotlight. Only in my own way. I was 12 when Grandma Marta first entered the house, not just as a guest, but as a true messenger of change. It happened on a gray Saturday afternoon, when the sky hung over Graceville like a wet blanket, and everything seemed to be covered with an invisible veil. I was sitting in my room, surrounded by notebooks, pretending to study, but in reality I was just tracing the edges of the pages with a pencil, thinking about how quickly the days filled with silence pass. Downstairs, the front door slammed, and a few seconds later, Grandma's voice rang out, cheerful, almost solemn. "Julia, put on your jacket and come down. I have a surprise for you." Surprises are a dangerous thing in our home. Most of the time they were about Savannah, new sneakers, concert tickets, or at least a trip to the mall. But there was something special about Grandma's voice, something that made me get up and reach for the hook by the door. In the kitchen, Grandma was already pouring herself tea, her cheeks rosy from the cold, and her eyes were burning like a child's on Christmas Eve. "I've enrolled you in a science program," she said, as if telling me she'd won me a trip to the moon. "In the city center at the library. Is free. There are classes twice a week, in the evenings. Experiments, projects, everything is real. You love science, don't you?" Yes. But I hesitated, not knowing how to say what was the first impulse. Am I worthy? "No buts," Grandma waved her hand. "I've already arranged everything. You're going there on Monday." End of discussion. It was as if I had entered another world in these classes. The white tables, the test tubes, the glare from the lamps on the glass flasks. It was all like a stage where for the first time I felt like a participant rather than a spectator. Dr. Lawson, our teacher, was a typical scientist with slightly tousled hair and glasses that constantly perched on the tip of his nose. But when he talked about science, his eyes flashed like his grandmother's. "The question is the basis of everything," he said. "If you don't ask questions, you don't live. Julia, what is your hypothesis about this experiment?" He always asked me. Not because I wanted to embarrass, but because I listened. And when, with a tremor in my voice, I described my conclusion for the first time, he nodded and said, "Great. Your logic is impeccable." It was like a wave of recognition washed over me. Not a compliment for the sake of politeness, not it's cute on the machine, but a real, well-deserved recognition. With each lesson, I felt like something was waking up in me. Confidence. Curiosity. Voice. And with that came a change I never expected, friends. They're just as enthusiastic, quiet, and sometimes a little weird, but with lively eyes and kind hearts. We gathered after class, argued, wrote projects, and laughed. For the first time, I felt like I didn't just exist, I belonged. When I turned 13, I was already participating in school debates. They trusted me with the word, put me at the pulpit, and listened to me. I talked about climate, inequality, and gender differences in science. The whole auditorium was looking at me. I, Julia Bennett, was standing in front of the audience, and my voice was no longer shaking. I was elected to the student council. They looked at me not as someone's sister, not as a shadow, but as a person. The real one. But happiness, as I understand it, always causes envy among those who are used to exclusive light. Savannah saw how my name started to sound at school. How I was invited to join groups, and how the teachers were praised. And she didn't like it. At first there were rumors. She told her parents that she saw me making out with Tommy at the gym. Or that I'm texting a guy from the debate team, and something's not right there. My parents didn't ask. They just took it at face value. From today on, no meetings after 6, my father said at dinner, not looking at me. And the phone is under our control. We need to know who you're talking to, Mom added. It's not a punishment, Julia. It's a concern. Savannah smiled silently, picking at her pasta with a fork. I tried to explain, but my words were drowned in walls covered with a layer of disbelief. My evening club meetings are a thing of the past. I had to leave right after class, explaining to my friends that we have strict rules at home. No one was laughing, but I could tell they were embarrassed. Then she moved from words to actions. My biology project, which I had been working on for 3 weeks, turned out to be flooded with water one morning. My notes, drawings, diagrams, everything blurred into faceless spots. Another time, a favorite sweater, a gift from my grandmother, ended up in a laundry basket with bleach stains. Mom shrugged her shoulders, probably an accident. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. They didn't hear. But the most painful thing was Leslie. My first real friend. We became close against the background of a love of biology and a strange attachment to old TV series. We sat next to each other in class, did projects together, and spent the night at each other's place. She was my rock, my mirror. Until one day she came to my locker, her eyes glistening with tears. I thought you were my friend, she whispered. Have you been writing about Matt in your diary all this time? Did you want to take him away? What? Leslie, no. I don't even have a diary. Savannah said she saw it. And you kind of admitted it yourself. I do not know what to think. That's a lie. I wouldn't. But she was already leaving, and I stayed at my locker, feeling the emptiness squeeze my chest. I knew who was behind it. She knew, but she couldn't prove it. That night, I walked into Savannah's room as if I were on a battlefield. Why are you doing this? I asked. Why would you destroy all the good things I have? She put down her phone and looked at me indifferently. Maybe if you stopped dwelling on yourself so much, you'd have friends. Not accusations and dramas. She smiled, and I suddenly realized that she liked it. It was fueled by my tears, my attempts to scream. She was feeding off my desperation. But despite everything she was destroying, there was already a light burning inside me. And she couldn't put it out. The light through the crack. My own flame. Sometimes disasters start with a holiday. Too much light, too much laughter, too much forced joy. It's all like a cover, a thin veil hiding a crack. And no one notices her until everything collapses in an instant. That's exactly what happened on Savannah's 15th birthday, the day when my entire fragile world, built on hope, on the flavors of strength and early victories, collapsed into dust, leaving only silence and bitterness. The house was full of people. It seemed like the whole of Graceville had come there, neighbors, my parents' colleagues, cousins with children I didn't know by name. The air was filled with the scent of vanilla and sweet icing. Balloons hung from the ceiling, golden and pink, like on the cover of a girly magazine. Mom was fussing over the stove, making sure that each dish was in its place, and Dad was arranging chairs, checking a list. And in the center of this celebration stood Savannah, in a silk dress, with her hair arranged in soft curls, smiling as if the whole world was a gift wrapped especially for her. I kept to the side, watching from around the corner, not interfering. No one called me to help, no one asked how I was feeling. I became a shadow even at a family party. All the attention is on her. All eyes are on her. I could only remain silent. The cake appeared to applause. It is huge, with 3 tiers, decorated with white cream roses and golden beads. The candles burned like sparks. When Savannah blew them out, there was an enthusiastic choral hurrah, and someone even launched a firecracker. I stood in the corner, watching my mother cut off the first piece for her, a large one with the top of a rose, and catch her gaze with pride in her eyes. After about 5 minutes, something changed. The room became a little quieter. Savannah was standing by the couch, holding a fork in her hand, and suddenly her fingers opened, a metallic clink cut through the air. Her face paled. She clutched at her throat, her eyes turned glassy. "Mom," she croaked, "Mom." Mom immediately jumped up. "Oh my God, Randy. She's suffocating." "Peanuts." Dad rushed to the first aid kit and pulled out a syringe with an EpiPen, his hands shaking as he stabbed it into Savannah's thigh. The whole room froze. The guests huddled against the walls, looking at each other anxiously. Someone was already taking out a phone. Someone was trying to take the children to another room. At that moment, the air became unbearably thick, like before a thunderstorm. Savannah, still breathing hoarsely, looked up and pointed at me. "Julia," she whispered. "She is." I was doing something with a cake. "What?" Mom turned to me, her face pale, her eyes full of horror. "Julia?" I stood rooted to the spot. "No." I didn't even go near the cake. Her purse, Savannah interrupted me, blew by the door. Dad spun around and grabbed my bag. I rushed forward, trying to stop him, but it was too late. He opened the zipper and took out a small jar of peanut butter. Small, almost invisible. It was on top of the wallet as proof. "This. It's not mine," I whispered. My heart was pounding like a bird in a cage. I do not know where she came from. She could have died, Dad roared, waving the jar. "How could you?" "I didn't do it." "Dad, please listen." But he wasn't listening anymore. Mom turned away, her lips trembling. "We trusted you," she whispered, and there was more pain in those words than I could bear. "Go up to your room," Dad said dully. "We'll decide what to do with you." Grandma Marta stepped forward, her eyes glittering with anger. "Wait a minute," she said firmly. "Everyone is too quick to judge. Did anyone even see Julia touching the cake? This should be investigated, not lynched." "Mom, not now," Mom interrupted her. "It's not up for discussion. We have to think about Savannah." I don't remember how the evening went. I sat in the room, listening to someone downstairs continuing to whisper, someone crying, someone calling to cancel the ambulance. After the injection, Savannah was on the mend. What about me? I just sat there. Stunned, crushed. A couple of hours later, my parents came in. "You're leaving tomorrow," Mom said. "Either with Martha, or we'll call custody. We can't keep you here any longer. We don't feel safe." "It's not my fault," I whispered. "Why don't you believe?" "Because the evidence is against you, Julia," her father replied. "We can't take any chances." I packed my things in silence, barely holding back tears. All my books, notebooks, and favorite sweaters are in one big bag. Savannah was leaning against the door frame. Her face was calm. Eerily calm. There was a slight, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. And at that moment, I realized that she had set it all up. But no one cared. All that mattered was appearances, outward calm, and well-being. I was a crack in their perfect picture. And the crack had to be removed. At dawn, Grandma arrived. Her old SUV was parked at the curb, the engine purring faintly. She hugged me tightly, hugged me like no one else had ever hugged me before. I glanced towards the house. My parents were standing on the porch. Savannah is between them. They didn't say a word. They just watched while I clutched the steering wheel in my lap and tried not to cry. "They're making a terrible mistake," Grandma whispered as we drove away. "But they'll understand. Sooner or later." I didn't answer. That night, I died in their eyes. Or maybe even earlier. It's just that it's official now. Sometimes a new life begins not with fireworks, not with applause, but with a simple morning light shining through the curtains of an unfamiliar room. That's how my first day began in Hillview, Washington, a city whose name I heard for the first time in my life, when Grandma Martha turned on the navigator and an old car with punctured shock absorbers drove us away from the house that was no longer home. We left early, without saying goodbye to anyone. The cabin smelled of cinnamon, mint, and hope. Grandma took custody as soon as we settled in. The local services did not object. She was a trustworthy, intelligent, and persistent woman who knew how to speak firmly and convincingly when necessary. I was quiet, obedient, and had good grades. No one asked unnecessary questions. And that was the best thing that could happen, the silence in which I could reassemble myself from the pieces. Hillview turned out to be a city of average streets and average hopes. There were no fancy shops or much fun, but there were cozy cafes with carved signs, manicured courtyards, and people who didn't know who I was before. So, I could become anyone. My new school, Hillview High, greeted me evenly, without enthusiasm, but also without suspicion. I was new, and that said it all. No one knew about the party, the cake, or the jar of peanut butter. No one looked at me warily, no one whispered behind my back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt what it was like to breathe deeply. I was silent a lot, but I did even more. In the very first week, I applied to participate in a science club, and a month later my team won an internal school chemistry competition. Then there was the biology tournament, then the genetics project, which we were invited to present at the district level. My fingers came alive again, touching the microscope, and my voice became more confident as I explained my hypothesis to the jury. Grandma rejoiced at my every success as if it was my first step to the moon. She hung my certificates on the refrigerator, wrote to her friends' grandchildren that her Julia would be a real doctor, and every time I doubted myself, she looked me in the eye and said, "You're destined for more." I've always known that. These words became my anchor. When I graduated from high school, everything about me was different, my posture, my voice, my gaze. I was no longer the girl who clutched my backpack at the door, waiting for fate to strike. I knew what I wanted. I didn't just dream of college, I dreamed of medicine, of a profession in which I could do good and remain needed. Not for the sake of recognition, but for the sake of inner confidence in one's own worth. I was accepted to the Seattle University of Medicine. It was a joy and a challenge at the same time. Studying was expensive, and scholarships were only partially enough. I started calculating how many loans I would have to take out when one evening my grandmother brought me an old envelope. Yellowed, with my name written in her handwriting. "I've been saving since you were 12, she said, handing it to him. "Not much, but it's yours. Because I knew you'd make a name for yourself. I've always known." Inside were neatly folded checks, notes, even bonds. For many years, the pennies saved from retirement, from knitting to order, from small transfers that she did not spend on herself. I wasn't crying then. I just hugged her and promised that I would do my best to make her proud of me. Studying at dental school was hell, honestly. I worked as a waitress at a late-night diner, cleaned the library in the morning, studied during the day, and read late into the night. Sometimes she collapsed, right in her clothes, on a narrow bed in a rented apartment, and the next morning she started again. There were times when it seemed like I couldn't stand it. When Mom's voice sounded in my head, "You're too introverted." When I thought of Savannah's grin. But then I called my grandmother. And she always answered the phone. "You can handle it," she said. "You're already coping. You are more than their words." 4 years flew by like a fever dream. I passed my exams, completed my internship, and defended my final project. And so, on one of those rare days when the sun shines in Seattle, I held my license in my hands. Document. Proof. Symbol. I was accepted into Brighton Dental Associates, a prestigious private clinic in Bellevue. My first stable salary, a private office, a white coat with my name on the tag. I didn't immediately believe it. I sat in the car outside the building and looked at my reflection in the mirror, trying to realize I did it. That evening, I posted the photo on social media. It had my hand holding the diploma and a short signature, Dr. Julia Bennett, DDS. Dreams come true. I wasn't expecting much of a reaction. I just wanted to capture the moment for myself. But the phone didn't stop for a minute. Congratulations poured in from everywhere: classmates, old acquaintances, teachers whom I hadn't seen for many years. Someone wrote, "You're inspiring." Someone, "We knew that you would succeed." And even Aunt Emma, to whom I haven't written since childhood, left a comment with emojis in the form of hearts. I was sitting in the kitchen scrolling through a list of messages when I saw one among them. It was short, without emoticons or unnecessary words, but it made my eyes go dark. "We are proud of you, Mom." I stared at the screen for a long time. The fingers froze. My heart was thudding. This phrase was the one I've dreamed of hearing all my life. Only now she came not from the depths of her soul, but from a virtual space. And all I felt was not joy, but a strange, quiet emptiness. When you receive a message from someone who betrayed you, your heart stops not with joy, but with weariness. From the inner tension, as if somewhere in the back of my mind, the alarm bells that had been learning to remain silent for so many years rang again. The words were short as needles. "We are proud of you, Julia. We want to see each other. Come to dinner." Signed, Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time. The fingers hesitated to answer. Two forces were fighting inside. One was stubborn, an adult, the one who survived and became a doctor without their help, without their faith, without their participation. The second is the same little girl who stood with a backpack on the threshold of her home, hearing how she was disowned. And maybe she was still hoping. At least for something. At least for a little bit of remorse. I agreed. I don't know why. Curiosity. An unclosed gestalt. Or maybe it's that same sense of duty that doesn't die even after exile. The next day, I drove up to the house I once lived in. I was sitting behind the wheel of my new Mercedes, the leather seats creaking pleasantly under the movement, and my fingers gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. The house seemed smaller than I remembered it. The paint was peeling around the windows, the path to the porch was uneven, and the tiles had caved in places. In my memory, it was cozy, almost bright. But reality had robbed him of that halo. Now he was just an old building where too much pain had occurred. The door opened before I could knock. Mom stood in the doorway, her lips stretched into a tight smile. "Julia. You're so mature, you look, professionally." It was as if she was trying to find words from someone else's dictionary. I went in. The smell in the house has not changed, a mixture of old furniture, lavender, and something mealy sweet. Dad was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV turned off. He stood up, awkwardly, with an effort. "Hey, kid," he said, not looking me in the eye. I nodded. Dinner was set on the table in the dining room: roast meat, potatoes, green beans. Mom exclaimed, as if remembering something important. "I've made your favorite dish." "Well, what used to be your favorite?" I sat down at the table, straightening the folds of my pantsuit. Dad poured himself some water and drank noisily. We ate in silence. Only the sound of forks, and the occasional, clumsy attempt to start a conversation. Do you work in a private clinic?" "Bellevue, right?" Mom asked, holding the fork too tightly. "Yes, Brighton Dental Associates." "It must be profitable," my father remarked, without looking up from his plate. "I'm doing fine," I replied calmly. "And where do you live?" "In an apartment in the center. I bought it recently." "For a mortgage?" They exchanged glances. Mom put down her fork, as if that was the signal for the main thing. "Julia," she began, looking at the table, we're having difficulties. Your father lost his job last month, and the company shut down. And I have arthritis. My hands won't work anymore. I can no longer work in the salon the way I used to." "It's hard," I said, taking a sip of water. Silence fell between us. "We could have lost the house," my father continued. "That's it. It's pouring out." "And Savannah," Mom interjected. "It's not easy for her either. She works at the mall, but it's a pittance. She's trying, but we're barely making it." We thought. His father's voice became a little strained. "Maybe you could help us. Temporarily. Just borrow it." "How much?" "20,000, they replied in unison. Something was getting cold inside me. Everything suddenly fell into place, like a puzzle where the last missing piece turned out to be not a heart, but a price tag. I put down my fork. "Good. I'll help you. But on one condition." Mom tensed up. The father froze. "You will tell the truth. Publicly. You admit that I didn't put peanuts in the cake. That you kicked me out of the house because of Savannah's lies. You admit it openly, on social media, or in writing, or whatever you want. The main thing is that it should be honest and from both of you." The silence was different. Thick. Impenetrable. Mom blinked. "Julia, it will ruin our reputation. We've been in this city all our lives," my father added. "People won't understand." "Of course they'll understand," I said. "They won't like that you chose to lie. But they'll love that you finally told the truth." "You can't blackmail us like that," Mom whispered. "I'm not blackmailing," I replied. "I'm offering a deal. Money for the truth." They were silent. I stood up and put my napkin on the table. "I'm sorry that you're in this situation. Truth. But I don't have to save you if you're not even willing to admit that you ruined my life once." I left the house without turning around. The Mercedes flashed in the sun as a response to their silence. I was left behind by the past, which was trying to pull me back into itself. But now I had limits. And the right to choose. The next day, a message arrived. "We can't. It will ruin our reputation. People will judge us. Of course you understand." I looked at the screen. And, to my surprise, I felt no pain, no rage, just calmness. Present. Liberating. I typed in a short reply. "Then I won't be able to help either. Of course you understand." The phone rang on Sunday, in the middle of a lazy, quiet day, when no one is in the clinic, And outside the window, raindrops are tapping on the glass with such a rhythm, as if the universe has finally decided to play along with me. I was sitting in my office, sorting out my tasks for the next week, when the screen flashed with a name that I had long ago learned not to wait for. Savannah. The name that once made everything inside tremble, now aroused only a slight, cold curiosity. I pressed the green button, but before I put the phone to my ear, I turned on the recording. My gut told me this wasn't going to be just a conversation. This will be a confirmation. Julia. Her voice cut through the silence. Sonorous, on the verge of screaming, with the same tremor that hid not resentment, but rage. You're heartless. Mom cries for you every day. Are you proud of yourself? Are you proud that you brought your parents to tears? I didn't answer right away. She just exhaled, slowly, deeply. I was no longer the one who was shivering in the hallway with a backpack on my back. Not the one who was kicked out without explanation. I was different. Steady. Collected. I'm Dr. Julia Bennett. And I had a voice. I don't play games, Savannah. I just want them to admit the truth. What truth? Her laugh was sharp. That you were trying to poison me? Everyone already knows that. No. I want them to say that you planted the jar. You. Not me. There was silence on the other side. But not out of confusion. Based on calculation. And if I tell you that they already know that? She said, as if challenging. I told them. A couple of months after you left. She said it was me. So what? My hand curled into a fist. What did they say? I asked. The voice was flat, almost cold. Dad said, maybe it's for the best that she's gone. And Mom just silently went into the kitchen. They didn't care, Julia. They had everything. Equally. She said it with such ease, with such pompous bravado, as if she hadn't realized until now that she was confessing to a crime. Or maybe that was her strength, her impunity. Confident that everything will pass by again. But now it was different. I ended the conversation without shouting. Without tears. Without humiliation. The recording was preserved, clear, cold, with all her words. And the next day, without thinking for a minute, I opened my laptop and wrote a post. Not an ounce of revenge, not a drop of anger. Only the truth. The one that has been waiting for so many years to come out. Many of you remember the incident on my sister's 15th birthday. Then I was accused of allegedly putting peanuts in the cake, despite her allergies. That was the reason I was kicked out of the house. Years of silence, loneliness, and struggle. I left, and since then I've walked a path that I'm proud of. But the truth is more important than any achievements. Today I'm posting a recording of a recent conversation with my sister. Listen carefully. I've attached an audio file. No shouting, no comments. Just her voice, her confession. Their indifference. And the internet buzzed. Like a beehive in spring, awakened by the first sun. The comments came down like hail. People wrote that they didn't know. That they're sorry. That they admire my courage. Old teachers, classmates, even a neighbor in the stairwell, who once wouldn't shake my hand when I stumbled at the mailbox. Leslie wrote, I'm sorry. Now I understand. I was blind. You've always been stronger than you looked. I read it with a slight detachment, as if it wasn't happening to me, but to someone I knew and respected. But it wasn't all sympathy. Something else came from the family. Mom wrote in anger, you destroyed this family. Do you think you've won? The father sent a voice message, where his voice, strained and calm, threatened, we will file a lawsuit. This is a violation of privacy. And from Savannah, a short one, deleted before it's too late. We have a lawyer. I answered briefly, exactly as professionals do. All the conversations were recorded and passed on to my lawyer. Any attempts at pressure, threats, or harassment will be dealt with legally. Don't contact me unless it's through official channels. And after that, silence. Real, pure silence. A soundless peace that I have not known since childhood. Grandma Marta came to me in the evening. Without a word, she placed a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses on the table. There was something shining in her eyes, like a person who, after passing through a storm, finally comes out on a sunny path. To the truth, she said, pouring. And to you, my brave girl. We clinked glasses. I took a sip and suddenly felt tears welling up. The warmth spread not only from the drink, but from awareness. I was no longer a prisoner of that old story. I wrote mine. Your truth. His victory. I couldn't have done it without you, I whispered. She squeezed my hand. I always knew you could do anything. They didn't break you. They only toughened you up. And now, when all the lies that once tried to consume me are exposed, I feel not vindictiveness, but freedom. I don't want revenge. I don't expect any remorse. I don't need their forgiveness. I've built my life. I have my profession, my patients, my friends. I have a grandmother who has become my only family. And most importantly, I have a voice. The one they tried so hard to drown out. The one that survived grew through the concrete of silence, became clear, sonorous and strong. That's my voice. And now it sounds loud. And no one can silence him anymore.